Welcome. So today we are going to be talking about the crazy book Yesteryear that is blowing up on BookTok and BookTube as a recommendation. There are mixed reviews. There are people that really love it, and there's people obviously that think it is the worst written book ever. But I'm here to basically spoil it all for you and also to give you my opinion, because I actually quite enjoyed this book. It's quite surprising. The twist at the end was just a surprise twist. I did not expect that to be happening, and it did get me a little bit sad at the end for reasons that I'll tell you about later on. But this book was written by Claire Burke, which long before it was released in April 2026, this book was already the rights of the book was already sold to the highest bidder, which was Amazon Studio, and it's going to be adapted into a feature film with Anne Hathaway set to star and produce it. And I do think Anne Hathaway is going to be great for this role. If you have read the book and you understand what the character is about, I think Anne Hathaway will have the ability to play the protagonist while she's in her sort of influence era, and then you'll see the downfall of this character, and I think she goes a little bit sort of off her rocks, and I think Anne Hathaway has the ability to do that. The novel will follow a 32-year-old Tradwife influencer named Natalie, and this influencer Natalie has 5 million followers, and to her audiences, she sells this idyllic life where she lives on a farm. She, promotes raw milk. There's a soft focus on the farm life and the fantasy of basically being a domestic goddess. Then one morning, she wakes up and what appears to be her same house that she's in, but the vibe of it is off. And you find out quickly that the year that she is now in is in the 1850s, I think 1855 to be a bit more accurate. Her house is familiar, but suddenly it looks older, rougher, and far more rustic than she remembered to be. And then she's married to a man named Caleb. Caleb is still Caleb. She recognizes him, but the version of him looks weathered and older and rougher and more icier and colder than the Caleb of her husband that she's used to. The house is worn down. Her husband looks like it's worn down, and they're in the middle of winter, and it's a hard winter and it's uncomfortable. Even the children feel eerily familiar to her own children. They resemble her sons and her daughters, yet their names are different to the ones that she remembers, and their personalities are also a bit different to the ones that she remembers. Instead of having 5 children, 3 girls, 2 boys, and another baby on the way, Natalie now has 2 daughters, 2 sons, and she's not pregnant at all anymore in this world that she's woken up to. So naturally, the big question for everyone is, what the hell is going on? Is this a time traveling book where she's, there to learn a lesson about not loving the Tradwife life as much as she has in the modern world? Because the real Tradwife back in the 1850s is not a good time, and that's what I thought this book was all going to be about. That it's almost like a life swap or a body swap where you're swapping your life with someone that actually has to live a traditional wife duty role, and she's about to learn a lesson that it's not as glamorous or as what people want it to be, because there is obviously in modern society now there are a lot of women or even men saying that we should go back to the old days where women are homestayers and their job is basically to look after the family, and some people are buying into that. Whereas this book, I thought the messaging was going to be, don't wish too hard, because in reality back then it was not a great time, especially for women. So this premise kept me turning the pages, because Burke writes the confusion very cleverly. You know something is definitely wrong, but the clues are scattered throughout Natalie's sort of fragmented thoughts, and the novel is more abstract in a lot of the moments. It makes the reader experience and feel like they're the detective trying to work through all the clues and try to piece together everything alongside with Natalie, who's also a little bit confused, and she's looking at her scenery, she's looking at what people say to her and try to work out and come up with theories, as you are with her, about why she was trapped here and why she sort of ended up being in this spot altogether. So like I said, I picked up this book expecting a sharp satire of Tradwife life, a woman getting a brutal reality check about what traditional living actually means back when women have very few rights, were often treated as just possession, and had to do everything without the comfort of modern technology. And I thought the point would be, surprise, this life is not quite the dreamy Instagram fantasy that people are trying to sell you. But Burke is doing something much bigger here. Instead of just handing us a neat little moral story and lesson about the dangers of Tradwife culture, she drops us right into Natalie's mind and lets us swim around in all her hopes. We see her fantasies, her contradictions, and of course her darker motivations. What I enjoy most was that the way the book comments on women's lives more broadly, not just about focusing on bagging out Tradwives, it shows that even the supposedly progressive women who have chosen maybe not to get married, not to have children, in modern day, there are women that have chosen that as well. And the novel doesn't let those women, progressive women, escape the modern world. It doesn't sort of leave them unscathed and untouched by the rules of the modern world, because even in a patriotic world, even the women that have chosen sort of the modern independent woman lifestyle still don't come out scot-free with the life that maybe they envision as well. And it also even touches on men who are trapped by the roles of that patriarchy that hands them, that asking them to be more manly, to be providers, and it doesn't seem to work out for them as well in some of the characters. So in the end, the book, I think, is saying that no one is really winning under the system that the humans have created currently in our lives, which I think is a stance that a lot of people would have, and it resonated with me quite well with the messaging of those sort of concepts in here. A lot of people have compared the novel's protagonist to a darkly satirical version of an influencer named Hannah Nelman. I didn't know much about a Tradwife influencer just because it's not really on my sort of radar when I go and look at, you know, social media, but obviously I looked her up just to see why there was that sort of similarities, and it does make sense that why that people would make that conclusion, because Hannah is an influencer behind a hugely popular Instagram account called @BallerinaFarm. And whilst our protagonist comes from a Christian background, Hannah comes from a Mormon background, previously selling raw milk, just like our protagonist in this book. And she also lives on a farm and is married to a man who comes from a family of wealth, which our protagonist also is in the same light. And both of them have many, many children with this one wealthy man. So I can see why a lot of readers will draw this conclusion, but I think the ending of the book links this to another mum influencer, which I will mention at the end, because I think if I mention that influencer now, it will give away the ending and how it's going to sort of all unravel, which I'll get into when I get into the spoiler section of the video. The author, though, is careful not to name any one influencer. Even in interviews that I've seen of her, she doesn't really say that she's focusing on one particular person, as a lot of them are not really unique in some ways, and many of them have very similar qualities when they are becoming a Tradwife influencer. The content that is created by each of these Tradwife influencers can sort of be seen in this character as well and repeated. So I would not pinpoint this to one particular person, but I would say definitely our protagonist is an amalgamation of many of the influencers, popular ones that we see online now. For the large portion of the book, I would say it was confusing on purpose, because Natalie, our protagonist, is confused. So you are too, as you are in her mind a lot of the time and in her thoughts and her point of view. However, once the reveal comes all out, it will make complete sense of why those little thoughts and sceneries were scattered throughout. If you are going to pick up the book, go into this knowing that that's how it's going to make you feel. It's going to be confusing for a big section of the book while she's in 1850, because just trying to navigate like her reality of why she ended up here, and you're meant to sort of have that feeling and that tension building up with her. And then once you actually know the answer to it, and if you go back on what she sees, I think everything becomes very clear to us as the reader. The novel's emotional conclusion stayed with me for a long time after I finished reading. I would not describe the ending as a happy one, but it can certainly be read as a hopeful one. Natalie Natalie is not a straightforward character. By the end, she exists as both, I think, a victim and a villain. That complexity is what makes the writing so effective. Burke takes a character who is, at times, deeply, deeply unlikable, and you'll find that, and even at times absurd, and yet still manages to make her feel human enough that I feel sadness and empathy for her. Natalie is not a cartoon villain. I do not condone what she does, but I can understand the circumstances and probably even her psychology that led her to what she does in the book. This is why I ultimately rated the novel a 4-star. While I thought Natalie's development was very compelling, the same cannot be said though for the side supporting characters. Many of them function mainly as plot devices or catalysts for making turns in the story for Natalie herself. As a result though, they will feel often unlikable, one-dimensional, or underdeveloped, and their motivations for their actions later on sometimes is not completely clear to me, and it therefore makes it unbelievable of why they will choose to do this in the book. And because their behavior does not always make sense, this made me feel like at some point, because we're trying to quickly get through sort of Natalie's thoughts into the twist, the novel will feel a bit rushed, I think. And the author did say herself that she was on a tight deadline to get it out before the world moved on for Tradwives, even though that trend seems to be still going on. And so it didn't leave enough time for edits and maybe enough space to fully explore the backstories of some of the side characters, which I think is still quite important, especially I think Caleb, which is the husband of Natalie. There is, I think, a lot of questions for me of why he did what he did, and also supported some decisions and also made some decisions or acted in certain ways that I didn't really find believable, or I think in reality a person wouldn't do that. Now, without further ado, here is my warning about heavy spoilers for the novel, because I'm going into the full recap. Welcome to Twist, the whole insane story told. So starting from the very beginning, like I said, Yesteryear follows the life of a woman named Natalie Heller Mills. She is an ambitious woman who transfers herself from a lonely, disciplined college student into a world-famous Tradwife, influencer on Yesteryear Ranch in Idaho. The narrative is split between a past timeline documenting Natalie's rise to fame and a present timeline where she appears to be living a literal 19th century pioneer life around 1855, where she is desperately trying to work out how she ended up in this timeline and in this world. The book opens up in the past, which is where we see Natalie at the peak of her career as an online traditional wife influencer. In the past, Natalie marries Caleb Mills, the son of a powerful political dynasty. She has in total 5 children and 1 on the way. She's pregnant at this opening scene. These children were born during Natalie's rise to fame as a Tradwife influencer. They were raised with hidden nannies and professional filming schedules. So we get introduced to the children, which I'll describe for you. We've got the oldest daughter, who is Clementine, and the oldest daughter, who is described by Natalie as an intelligent, malevolent child who looks just like a clone of her mother. So they resemble each other quite a lot. At age 12, she began rebelling against being filmed and asks her mother what a Tradwife is. Obviously, Natalie doesn't really like the term Tradwife. It is not something that she refers to as herself, but she does say that a Tradwife is what the angry women online call her. Then you got Samuel and Stetson, who are the 2 eldest sons, often described as behaving like dressage ponies. So them 2 are always together and spoken to almost like not as an individual, but as a duo in Natalie's content. And then you have Jessa, labeled as the firecracker for social media branding. She's a little toddler. She is often cared for by her nanny, Amy, while Natalie focuses on filming. So obviously Jessa is very much raised by another woman, but she still, you see the opening scene, quite adores her mother because she clings to her quite a little bit. And then you have their 5th child, Junebug, who was born at home, and the home birth was filmed by their producer, Shannon, for, of course, online content. And then, like I said, Natalie is currently 6 months pregnant with her 6th child, a little girl at the time of the pregnancy, and she nicknames the little baby My Little Sea Creature while she's in her belly, because the meaning behind this nickname is rooted in Natalie's experience watching the baby during an ultrasound. As the technician moves the wand over her stomach, Natalie looks at the grey matter on the screen and imagine her unborn daughter as various aquatic animals, specifically like a jellyfish or a sea otter and a darting silver minnow. This imagery led her to use a phrase in her private thoughts throughout her pregnancy. So whenever she's, holding on to her tummy or referring to her pregnant child, in her head she's like, oh, this is my little sea creature. Initially, you see in the first chapter that Natalie is perceiving her life as a divine mission, and she describes herself as being perfect at being alive. So in her perspective, she does everything so well and everything just comes easy to her. She views her role as a mother, a wife, and influencer as a series of tasks she accomplished with spades of discipline, feeling a sense of nauseating perfection about how well she manages her world and that everything just comes easy to her always. And at the start, I was like, okay, you have a very sort of positive view of yourself, a bit delusional, but maybe that is true. Like, I didn't know if that was delusion at the point in time or she just had, a bit of ego about her because she was making it work. So Natalie's idealized online persona as a self-sufficient tradwife is supported though by a team of employees. So quickly when you find out that is the case, off camera she's got like a breadth of employees helping her. You can see that her image starts to now slip a little bit for us as the readers and be like, whoa, it's a little bit of a lie or just a persona you're putting out there and you're not really that perfect, are you? In her group of employees, you have Nanny Louise, and she's described by Natalie as a godsend. Louise handles the bulk of the domestic labor, such as making pancakes for the children and serving as their homeschooling teacher, because all the kids do not go to public school or private school. They are all kept at home and educated that way by Nanny Louise. Before Nanny Louise came along, I guess it was Natalie and her husband that were homeschooling their kids. Then you have Nanny Amy, labelled as the second in command. Amy is responsible for the physical care of the young children, including waking them up, kissing them, giving them love, and managing their hygiene. Tasks Natalie occasionally forgets a part of her real life because she really doesn't do it because she's too busy making content. So she's got somebody else doing, the keeping the children alive basically and keeping them well sort of tasks. Then you have Natalie's producer Shannon. She is Natalie's right arm or, 2IC basically. She handles all technical aspects of content creation using professional equipment to make Natalie's life look like how piano sounded soft, natural, and meticulous is how Natalie has described it. In this reality where Yesteryear Ranch is a thriving brand, Caleb Mills plays a role of the idealized patriarch and hardworking farmer guy, though his actual contributions to the farm life were heavily selective and curated by the camera, and what he actually does on the farm is very little. While Natalie portrays Caleb as a self-sufficient man of the land, he only really performs the chores he personally enjoys, such as milking the cow for daily milk. Every morning he's very disciplined in the sense that he gets up at the same time every day and he goes out and he milks their cow. And he performs this very well, but that's what he enjoys to do. He then obviously, like a true man or a true boy, likes to drive heavy machinery. He goes around driving the big John Deere tractor around the pastures. Not really doing any sort of farming, but he likes to drive through his farm on these big machines. But for chores he dislikes, such as, cleaning, planting vegetables, or mucking out stores, like cleaning them up, he relies on hidden ranch hands who were never shown to his wife's 5 million social media followers. So there's workers everywhere helping them out to do all this farmland work. It's never just the two of them, which, ultimately at least makes sense because two people can't do all the work maybe of a large farm or maybe they can on a small farm, I don't know, because I haven't lived on a farm. And it would make sense that you get help, but the problem is they're not honest about it. They make it look like they're doing this all on their own and everything is hidden. Caleb then in Natalie's life is an essential prop. He frequently participates in content days, acting out scenes of romanticizing rural life, such as sweeping Natalie off her feet for a kiss, like dipping her in the chicken coop, or tipping his cowboy hat to her while she's filming and be like, hey there, lovely, hey there, love, a darling. Natalie private views her husband though as a project and work to mold him into the last living John Wayne to appear to their audience. But in reality, You find out later, Caleb is not that man at all. Caleb, though, at least has bamboozled his sons, Samuel and Stetson, who worshipped him, and followed him in lockstep around the ranch. He involved them in manly duties such as building enclosures and using the nail gun, which Natalie encourages as part of their divine mission to raise a traditional American family. Of course, as we all know, influence have their supporters and of course they'll have their haters. Natalie uses the term the angry woman to describe her online critics and anyone who challenges her sort of idealistic tradwife lifestyle. Natalie perceived these women as simply just being unhappy individuals who are chemically addicted to hating on her all the time. Natalie views herself as a shark and the angry woman as 5 million tiny little fishes who nip at her for nutrition. She believes they need her because her account provides them with temporary escape and a way to live vicariously through her perfection. Now, Natalie tries to justify her life. In her head, you'll see early on, she dismisses her critics, such as claims that her life is fake or that she has breeder tendencies as being rooted in ranch jealousy. So simply these women are just jealous of her. She assumes they are just winos who spend their time scrolling through her life rather than improving their own and living their own life. You'll meet early on Vanessa. So Natalie goes to Target and she bumps into a lady named Vanessa. So who is Vanessa? Vanessa is a former high school track teammate of Natalie who now works as a nurse. Natalie encounters her at the Super Target shop on a particular day, which serves as a catalyst for Natalie's internal triage against angry women. So Vanessa was introduced basically so that you can get the full brunt of how Natalie feels about these women. Natalie views Vanessa with a mix of pity and extreme judgment, privately calling her a see you next Tuesday and the B word. She looks down on Vanessa for having 2 overflowing shopping carts filled with chemical bloated ham and disposable products, contrasting this with her principled adherence to eating only local and to reduce waste. Vanessa is of course one of the angry women who Natalie believes monitors Instagram to just simply mock her. Specifically, Vanessa has previously pointed out to Natalie's mother that Caleb was selling vegetables at a farmer's market that are not really organic, noting that in one of her photos, she saw hidden pesticide barrels, and so it cannot be completely organic and pesticide free, right? During this encounter that she has with Vanessa, Natalie intentionally tries to humiliate her by inviting her to the farm to see where ham comes from, very patronizing tone, knowing that it will needle her and sort of irk her. Then when they part ways, Natalie feels certain that Vanessa is going home just to post snarky comments about her online later. Later that night, Natalie receives some life-changing news. First from the producer Shannon, and then from her husband Caleb. Let's start with Caleb's news first, shall we? Because this one was not a surprise to her. Caleb's father has encouraged Caleb to run for office, to go into politics, which makes sense because his father is Doug Mills, who isn't just a senator, but he's a bona fide political icon. He's been in office for 4 decades. He's a war veteran. He holds strong family values, and he's pretty much the real life John Wayne, the ultimate patriarchy representation. It makes sense that his son will follow in his footsteps and also join politics. Then you have the more shocking news, which come from Shannon, who sends an email that says this: Natalie, I'm writing to let you know that I won't be working for you any longer. Between what happened over the summer and all the nightmares, it's clear that this job isn't good for my mental health any longer. I've got a bus ticket for later tonight. I don't need a ride. Nanny Amy is going to drive me to the station. For what it's worth, I don't think you are a bad person. I think you're just confused. Please tell the kids I love them. Shannon. P.S. I'm sorry for screwing up your content calendar. And all Natalie thinks is, wow, well, Shannon, this is rich of you to think that I'm a bad person when, Shannon, you are the one that is sleeping with my husband. What a bold woman. But Natalie doesn't tell Caleb about Shannon's resignation. Instead, she says, we should pray, Caleb. Let's get on our knees and pray. And in her head, she's saying, please let this plan work, Lord. Please don't let her win. And please give my husband a spine. I'm tired of him needing to borrow mine. Amen. So that's one full chapter that you'll get into, and then we quickly move into what they call the part which is the present timeline. Natalie's waking up disorientated in a cold, rundown house, not knowing if it's been a day, a week, or a month. She quickly realizes that her environment has fundamentally changed. Her modern flannel-lined duvet is gone, replaced by a stiff hand-knitted quilt, and her walnut bedside table and cell phones are missing. When she falls out of bed in the dark, she notices the floor is no longer imported hardwood, but feels frigid, knotted, and lumpy. She remains in the dark as there doesn't seem to be any lights in the house or any electricity, but she hears children laughing, multiple children. She calls out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" And immediately a reply comes from another room. "Mama, we're having breakfast." She is able to move through the house as the layout is identical to her own ranch, Yesteryear. So by memory alone, she makes her way to the kitchen and there is a warm light, but she suddenly stops and notices several uncanny details. The layout of her house is obviously identical to the ranch that she has, but it's more ramshackle, with rotten floorboards and visible slivers of sky coming through the ceilings now. So obviously there's holes in the roof. The modern kitchen is stripped of all its hidden pantry, microwave, and dishwasher that she had in her old ranch. And the once non-functional fireplace is now the only source of light and heat that the house is producing. Then there's the children. She finds 4 children, all wearing pioneer reenacted clothing, it looks like. While they resemble her own children, so they have similar features to her own children, she says they feel like wax dolls or aliens in skin suits. The oldest girl looks to be about a teenage age, so like her oldest daughter, Clementine, but not Clementine. Her name is Mary, who acts with a cold discipline and basically is the one who is running the whole household. And then you've got another little girl who is getting her hair braided by the older girl. And then sitting there is a little boy who looks about maybe 8 or 9. And that little boy does either look like Samuel or Stephen, but he's neither of them. And then there's another older boy who looks to be about 13. On the door threshold, she notices and sees like a recording of the children's height. So obviously people have marked the door and the names are next to it. And the measurements are for a girl named Maeve, who she assumes is a little girl. And then you've got Noah and Abel. And they're dated between the years 1852 and 1854. And then there is a fresh notch of herself that reads Mama, and the year is 1855. So this is how the reader, and I guess Natalie, has pieced together that it looks like and it feels like they're now living in 1855. She's obviously shocked by the date. She rushes outside and sees their barn, which looks old and worn compared to her $30,000 technically enhanced chicken coop that she used to have. And it's replaced by a wooden thatched shed, which looks very, rustic and old-fashioned. And she even noticed a horse that looks like her old horse, but this one has different white patches on their body, making her feel as though she's looking at a world through a oil slick, like an oil slick painting maybe. And she turns around and comes face to face with Caleb, who normally has a very soft face and a puppy dog eye demeanor about him. But this man's eyes are black and they're cold and they seem dead. He looks like a distant relative of Caleb rather than her actual husband. He is an older version, an older man. And so therefore for the rest of the book, she will refer Caleb as, her original husband, and this Caleb as old Caleb. So the distinction of who she's talking about. She looks down at herself and realizes she's wearing a floral cotton nightgown that she doesn't really recognize, and more distressingly that she is no longer 6 months pregnant. She's not pregnant at all. Natalie's primary emotion is a big and black and bottomless terror, and she describes as plummeting into hell. She experienced a profound sense of wrongness, feeling as though maybe she's been abducted or kidnapped by people wearing rubber masks of her family. She becomes intensely paranoid, suspecting that the children have been trained to answer her questions and that the entire ranch is a stage performance, or maybe she's stuck in a reality TV show to entertain the public. Terrified and scared, she runs down the gravel road, so she tries to run away from the house to escape the man that she doesn't recognize as her husband. Old Caleb, though, goes after her, and once he gets to her, he knocks her out and knocks her unconscious. And because it's not 1855, DV was obviously more common, and I think it wasn't even considered a crime when a husband has to discipline his wife. And so it reflects certainly the timeline that we are thinking that Natalie is in. And we're also thinking that Caleb was always a bit more the submissive kind of husband. And it indicates that this new man is definitely not her husband because he's abusive. Later on, after being forced into a pioneer routine, Natalie makes a second escape attempt and sprints for the woods at sunset. Only she doesn't get very far because her ankle is then caught in a steel trap. After this incident, Natalie gives up on escaping as she can pretty much no longer walk and she's stuck sort of hobbling along. And she's been told by the oldest daughter, Mary, that there are traps all out throughout the woods and she doesn't want to risk obviously getting trapped again and obviously not being found. At least this time, like with the ankle being trapped, it wasn't bone deep. She didn't need to seek, medical attention. Mary herself just stitched it up herself in a really rough way. I don't know how Mary knows that skill, but this little teenage girl who seems to run everything knows how to take care of a lot of things. But eventually, feeling broken and exhausted, she goes on a one-woman union strike, refusing to leave her bed. However, she also begins to play along with the delusion and hoping that if she acts the part of the helpless and beautiful victim, she will eventually be saved by someone. Throughout the section that is the present, you move with Natalie as she basically tries to survive 1855. And then you'll get flashbacks all the way back to her college years before she became famous, and the Natalie we see living at Yesteryear Ranch as an influencer, and it'll explain to you how she ended up becoming one, because that's not where really her life started off being like at all. Natalie's journey from a disciplined college student to a world-famous Tradwife influencer began with a deep-seated feeling of isolation during her time at Harvard University. Having been raised in a very strict Christian household in Idaho, where a mother told her that a woman's job was to be a wife and mother, Natalie arrives at college feeling as though she has been waterboarded to death by modern life, basically. She finds that her peers seem to hate traditional families and homemaking lives. She has a roommate named Rena, who was one of those peers she disdained the most. As she was her college roommate at Harvard, she obviously had a lot of interactions with her. The relationship between the two was hostile from the get-go, while Rena hosted loud get-togethers in their dormitory and pressured Natalie to drink. One night, Rena even brought back a boy to the room to have, intimate times with. And Natalie was just lying there in the opposite bed, hearing everything and praying and eventually vomiting from the sensory horror of the experience and being there while they were doing that. The tension peaked when Rena called Natalie mean, jealous, and a bitch during a party. Natalie retaliated by calling Rena unintelligent, a person who would never know true wonder, and a loose woman, as we can say, without being sort of cancelled on this channel. Rena then physically attacked Natalie, grabbing her hair and punching her in the face, so things got really ugly. But this fight allowed Natalie to finally move into a single room house that she desired at college. What makes Natalie, though, so interesting and often so difficult to sit with is that she never feels comfortable around people. She is constantly measuring everyone around her and privately deciding they are stupid, they are shallow, or they are always beneath her. At the same time, she is also performing normal social behaviors with very visible effort, as if every interaction is something she has to study rather than something that comes naturally to her or to other people. While I was reading, I kept wondering whether maybe Natalie might be neurodivergent. That said, though, when I tried to look it up, Burke clarified that writing Natalie as neurodivergent was not her original deliberate intention. If people interpret it that way, I guess people do, but that was not what the author was trying to do. So I would frame this more as a possible reader interpretation than a confirmed part of the character, but I certainly thought that way about Natalie, which also I think made me then empathize a bit more with Natalie, and maybe I was trying to explain the behavior of Natalie, of why she would be this way and how she got where she was, because she was different. She just wasn't naturally sociable like some other people are. So because of her, the way she is, Natalie was feeling quite isolated, and she eventually joined a campus church group. And this is where she met her future husband, Caleb. Natalie was drawn to Caleb because he was handsome to her, wealthy, and most importantly, he liked her. So possibly this was the first time that a man paid her attention, and she was quite drawn to it from the get-go. They were married very, very quickly, And the summer after her freshman year, in a massive 400 guest wedding at her family's estate in California. As we know now, he is the son of a politician, Senator Doug Mills, so he had the capacity to, have this elaborate wedding for Natalie and himself. At Natalie's wedding, we are introduced to her older sister, Abigail. Natalie's opinion of her sister, Abigail, is obviously very judgmental. She thinks that she herself is more superior to her sister, and there is competitive resentment. She describes their relationship as being like a queen and a pawn on the chessboard, being she's the queen, her sister is just that pawn that she moves around to manipulate and get what she wants, noting that pretty much she doesn't think they're equals and she's always feeling superior and better than her. Abigail married her high school sweetheart, Bryce, who Natalie describes as a pimple-faced corn dog with a bad temper. So right from the get-go, you know that Natalie thinks not much of her sister, not much of her husband, and it sounds like that her sister's husband might be a little bit abusive or a lot abusive as well. In contrast, her sister's wedding pretty much was in a backyard reception where Bryce passed out drunk on the lawn before even night fell. Although Natalie thinks so little about Abigail's life, they do have something in common, which is they trapped themselves into bad relationships. Not only did they pick maybe incorrectly in their partners, they trap themselves in their marriage now by having children, lots and multiple of children with their husbands very quickly, and then them not leaving fast enough, which I'll get into later. As soon as they're married and you find out that on their wedding night, both of them are virgins, Caleb doesn't really know what he's doing, Natalie's sort of doesn't know what's happening either, but regardless, they successfully consummate the marriage because Natalie becomes pregnant with her first child, Clementine, right after. By the spring of her sophomore year, she runs into her old roommate, Renna, and was already just past maybe 6 months pregnant. Clementine was born in August, approximately 1 year after the wedding, and Natalie just drops out of college. After the birth of their first daughter, Clementine, Natalie struggled with overwhelming sense of wrongness, and you can tell she's suffering from postpartum depression, which no one around her was going to help her with and didn't really sort of work through it with her. Even when Natalie confesses to her mother, Eliza, that she felt like an experiment and that there has been a mistake because she felt like her baby was evil, her mother responded airily that childbirth takes the wind right out of you and it would be worth it in the end, and just dismisses her feelings and doesn't sort of suggest anything further for her to do. When a nurse suggests to her mother that Natalie might want to go see a psychologist, her mother just ignores the nurse and instead encourages Natalie to sneak out for a jog right after she was pregnant, and it will help her get her endorphins up. Even though Natalie just, had significant tearing from the childbirth, that was the mother's suggestion. So you can tell that Natalie doesn't really have the support system that she needs to help her with this postpartum depression, and I think it has a huge sort of mental strain on her going forward as well. Her mother's primary advice to Natalie was to doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith, and to fake the emotions until they felt real. So even instructed Caleb to buy Natalie new running shoes, a new pair of baby blues to run the other kind away as a shallow fix for her misery. And 100% Eliza is probably not the best person to be giving advice about marriage or children, since she is a deeply religious woman who raises her daughter in a small Idaho town after their father passed away. Even though Natalie knows that her father is still alive but left her mother for simply another woman. She never divorced him because she is a good Christian woman. Instead, she just goes around pretending to the world that she is a widower. So this sort of concept of pretending that to be perfect or pretending to be something else, clearly that it is something that will be ingrained into Natalie's psyche from her mother. And that trace obviously is passing on, and it makes a little bit more sense now, while Natalie later on will pretend her lifestyle is perfect on the ranch. You would think that Natalie's husband Caleb could be helping his wife during this difficult time after she gives birth, but Natalie quickly tells you that her husband is only a nice, dumb, rich kid. Immediately following their wedding, Caleb resists finding a career, arguing that there is no rush because they already have money, because he's like a trust fund baby, right? So he has no real motivation. He suggests really unrealistic paths like going to graduate school eventually, traveling to Europe maybe with just a newborn kid and his wife, or maybe opening a bar. But most of the time, he spends sitting at home, watching football and playing video games, and that's what he does. At one point, he even goes out and buys a yoga mat and begins practicing downward facing dog in his driveway during like morning commute, during peak hours while the neighbors are driving past to get to work. That's what he does. And Natalie is obviously deeply humiliated by this action because he really isn't the man that she wanted him to be. He becomes also obsessed with online forums, which he calls the manosphere, retreating to his office to read about chemical trials and the feminization of women and the hidden truths of the public school system that he thinks is corrupt, which also is why later he wants to homeschool his children. Caleb is the youngest of 5 sons in an American dynasty, and you see that he was raised pretty much by parental neglect and maternal sympathy that left him soft and spoiled. So his dad was barely around or expected, certain things of men. And you'll see later on that his mother also was not equipped to be raising that many children as well. So it's like a vicious cycle that follows maybe him and also Natalie later on. Natalie realizes that while Caleb attended Harvard, he likely probably only got in because of his family name and not because he was that intelligent to begin with. And Natalie quickly realizes that she mistook his wealth for his intellect and feels she was impregnated by a toddler after he sulkily asked his mother for a glass of milk during a tense family confrontation. So this is a man-child that she has married. She's highly disappointed and she's going to postpartum depression. So nothing is looking too good right now for Natalie at the early stages of her marriage. Then the idea of Yesteryear Ranch emerges as a desperate strategic pivot for Natalie to prevent pretty much her husband, Caleb, from pursuing a career she found professionally and socially humiliating because he said one day he wants to be a substitute kindergarten teacher. Not just a kindergarten teacher or a teacher that is dedicated, he just wants to substitute. So he wants to be like a floater kindergarten teacher. So therefore, one Saturday morning, Caleb triumphantly announces that he found his purpose by applying for a field substitute teacher position at his former private school. While Caleb was genuinely excited about this role, believing he would be incredible at teaching children basic facts like blue is a primary color, which I don't know if that's correct, but it could be. I thought it was red, yellow, and green. But it could be blue as well. And then Natalie, finding out this fact, is horrified, right? She viewed the job as humiliation incarnation and feared it would end any dream of a respectable life for herself, consigning them to be a kindergarten family. In order to steer him away from this dream of his, Natalie instead tries to scare him with claims about modern school curriculums being anti-Christian, but Caleb remains undeterred until she shifts tactic, recalling his misty-eyed comment about farm life on their very first date and his childhood desire to be a cowboy or an actor. She realizes she could mold him into a real-life cowboy because it fulfills both his needs, right? Because he gets to act and he gets to be a cowboy. She reasons that he didn't need a work ethic. He just needs to learn how to pretend to have a work ethic. After finding a listing online for 500 acres of cattle ranch in Idaho that had fallen into disrepair, Natalie took the proposal to her father-in-law, Senator Doug Mills. Her pitch was meticulously crafted. She acknowledges that Caleb was not fit for a corporate world and would quit any traditional job that Doug might have found him in his, political party. And then she said the solution was she presented the ranch as a permanent life-altering solution where Caleb could enjoy his work and his freedom. She admits Caleb couldn't run it obviously himself, but explained they would hire workers to handle the labor while building a brand around local meat, fresh eggs, and of course, raw milk. When Doug was like, well, how much is this going to cost me? Natalie requests that she wants $5 million to cover the purchase and the first 3 years of operation, and in which case she believed that after 3 years of operations with that $5 million, she was able to turn it around and make it a profitable work. Doug agrees to provide the funds, but only after demanding a very specific thing from Natalie as a trade-off. He stated that in exchange for funding her family fantasy, Natalie has to have more babies with his son to provide him with a big American family, because that's what he wants for his son. Doug even pointedly noted that it's harder to conceive while someone's breastfeeding, pressuring her to prioritize her next pregnancy ASAP. Natalie agrees to the terms immediately, seeing it as it is a beginning of a divine mission for her to give each other Now, purpose. She has a purpose to give Caleb a family. Caleb now has a purpose to be a real-life cowboy. Upon moving to their 500-acre Idaho property, the reality, though, of farm life was far from the idealized cowboy fantasy that Natalie had pitched to Caleb, because once they finally moved in, their initial farming efforts were a catastrophe. It was a disaster. Caleb ordered yellow chicks that unfortunately bloated and passed away shortly after arrival. And their first dairy cow developed mastitis, and she ended up banging her head against the wall of the barn in pain and passed away a month later. So they didn't know how to keep animals sort of alive for very long. And there was a huge financial strain on running a farm. Despite the $5 million that Doug gave them, the ranch was a jail cell and it never turned a profit. Caleb joked that their zucchini and egg sales were barely going to cover the tank of gas for his truck to drive to a farmer's market. And that's all they did. They just knew how to grow vegetables, of course using pesticides, but they didn't know how to raise animals and sell them off. So they made very little money, and it was just churning through the $5 million that they were given. Now, as we know, the central part of the agreement that Natalie had with Doug was providing a big American family. However, conceiving their next child was very difficult. After their first daughter was born, Natalie and Caleb tried for more than 2 years to have a second child without success. Caleb was unenthusiastic and pained by the requirement to have intimate times with his wife. Often at times he couldn't perform his manly duties, shall we say. Natalie, being frustrated by his lack of drive, she eventually uses a sauce baster in the kitchen to ensure that she conceived their second child, Samuel. Then 2 years after Stetson was born, and then immediately after their third child, she was pregnant and gave birth to Jessa. And I suspect that at this point, Natalie had mastered the ability to impregnate herself. So really not needing Caleb to do the act, just needing some of his best swimmers, and she took care of the rest. So at least Natalie was fulfilling that duty of growing her family. She was at the same time trying to grow her social media presence. Once they moved to the ranch, she began posting about their farm life, but for years the account only reached a modest 3,000 followers, which for people that are building their sort of social media presence, it is a grind, and she was grinding away, but with not very much success. Even after taking a course to improve her online strategy, nothing really changed and nothing really grew. If anything, the feedback that she received by the course was that her image looked too staged and not really relatable to the public. Then when Nellie was 26 and 9 months pregnant with Jessa, so obviously almost giving birth to Jessa, everything shifted for her. There was a popular bearded talk show host, and he featured her account and described her as a wholesome, traditional American wife and a vision of the true American dream that she was living. He found her through some manosphere that Caleb was part of, and Caleb has shared one of Natalie's posts to the group. So in a strange way, Caleb did help launch her viral fame, even though Natalie never acknowledged or thanked him, I don't think, in the book. I never saw it. In just under 24 hours, her account jumps from 3,000 to 300,000 followers, which is amazing, right? Within 3 months of that shout out, she reached 1 million followers, and she just kept maintaining this growth. Natalie's thinking, wow, I've mastered social media, and it becomes addicting to her. With that sort of growth and sort of fame, Natalie becomes addicted to working this illusion of her life, curating highlight reels all the time, but making sure that she hides her nannies and store-bought ingredients. Her fifth child was conceived after her account passes 2 million followers. Natalie has a home birth with Junebug, and this was professionally filmed because at this stage she has hired her producer Shannon. Shannon is the catalyst though that changed the course of Natalie's life. Natalie decides to hire producer Shannon on a warm day in June, shortly after an interview at a coffee shop in town that she has with her. At that point, Natalie was 30 years old, newly pregnant with her fifth child Junebug, because obviously we know Junebug is not year born because Shannon films it, and her Instagram account has just surpassed 2 million million followers. So initially, Natalie has issued a call out for a producer via her Instagram pages weeks earlier, and she received, of course, hundreds of applicants who wants to be her producer. While she was surprised that Shannon, a Barnard dropout with pink hair and a hipster aesthetic, wanted the job, she was really captivated during the interview by Shannon's description of Natalie's life as a roadmap out of the maze of modern consumerism, because at this point in time, Shannon thinks that Natalie's life is quite real as what she portrays it to be. After the interview, Natalie sat in her car reflecting on Shannon's intoxicating delivery and sent her a text saying, "You are hired," straight off the bat. And then, of course, throughout this time when her Instagram is growing, Natalie, of course, hires her nannies. So when they hired Nanny Louise, she was pregnant with her 4th child, and Nanny Amy shortly came after that, after Natalie became pregnant with her 5th child. And then now you've got Shannon joining the team soon after Amy. So you've got like this whole breadth of staff members. So initially, Natalie loves Shannon because she's taken and elevated her content to the next level. She sort of handles all the technical aspect and makes everything look quite beautiful and Instagram worthy. However, Natalie eventually realizes hiring her was a mistake that fundamentally dismantled her carefully curated world. Shannon was the first person to bring a critical eye to the ranch. Shannon spends over 2 years secretly documenting the ranch's fraudulent activities, including filming hidden ranch hands, photograph hidden pesticide barrels, and noting made in China stickers on merchandise that Natalie claims are artisan and sells at a very heavy price to her viewers and people. Shannon also intentionally sort of undermines Natalie's authority by giving her oldest daughter, Clementine, a secret cell phone so she could, find out basically about the world. She exposes the children to the modern world and teaching them about oceans and life outside the ranch, which ultimately led to Clementine rebellion to the online life that Natalie exposes her to. And that's why I guess Clementine also rebels being on film, on camera, and also why she asks her mum what a tradwife is. Shannon's role then shifts from employee to adversary when she begins an affair with Caleb. She challenges his conspiracy theories and she provides him with the company of being like the first person on the farm who ever treated him, I guess, like a human being. And she treats him like a person, as an intellectual, like equal, and not just a project that she has to fix. When Natalie discovers the betrayal of Shannon, it leads to a very violent altercation where Natalie strangles Shannon, and possibly there is indication that she tried to essay her, although that part was denied by Natalie. But it is clear in the novel that in the fit of rage, Natalie had an out-of-body experience and does strangle Shannon. And the essay part is because you read that Shannon's pants were down a bit, whether it was during the struggle that it fell down or because Natalie tried to pull it down. That part was a little bit unclear, and I think it's subject to interpretation. I initially didn't read it as essay, but looking at other opinions and even other sort of YouTube videos, there was indication and people's interpretation that maybe Natalie was somewhat inclined to do that, or she had an attraction to her, and because she was having an out-of-body experience, she didn't really know what she was doing at that point, except for the strangling part, which she acknowledged that she did. As the novel moves into the final reveal of what is actually happening in 1855, so we're going to start to get answers of what this is all about. Is it magical? Is it a kidnapping? Is it something entirely? Natalie's pioneer reality starts to crack. Her days start to blur together in what she describes as a mixture of, I have good days and bad days on this ranch. On the good days, she leans into the fantasy life and tries to become cheerful picture book pioneer wife, doing chores with forced optimism and obedient energy. On the bad days, though, that hope completely just collapses. She'll lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, convinced she's trapped in some kind of stage performance that will just never seem to end. Mary also begins giving her bitter, cold tonics to calm her down and make the bad feelings go away. At this point in the book, I was convinced that I figured out the twist. Early in the book, we meet Caleb's mother, Emily, Mills, who Natalie describes as a special edition presidential Barbie, floating quietly behind her powerful husband, Senator Doug Mills. Emily clearly despises her own life, and her main coping mechanism seems to be a steady mix of painkillers and Chardonnays and practiced detachment in her life. She even refers to her small white pills as mother's little helpers, and at one point offers one to Natalie when she sees how badly she was struggling with motherhood on her first birth. Because of that, I thought maybe Natalie was going to become a version of Emily, overwhelmed by marriage, motherhood, and influence of fame, until she became dependent on the pills herself because she did get one. Maybe she got addicted, or maybe she had a complete mental breakdown. And my theory was that the pioneer world that she was envisioning was actually some kind of institution that she was trapped in. While she was trapped in this institution, all the workers there became part of her delusion, right? So I thought maybe Mary was a nurse because Mary gave her tonics. Mary was the one that dictated what was happening to her and sort of bossed her around and got her to do things. And then Caleb was maybe another patient or an attendee who was taking advantage of her because he does have intimate relationships with her and has convinced her that she has to sleep with him as it was her wifely duties and he is her husband, which is why Caleb doesn't look like the same Caleb. Caleb is much colder and more violent. And then maybe Maeve, because Maeve and her have a really quite loving relationship eventually, and Maeve follows her around, and she maybe was another person that was institutionalized, or maybe it was a figment even of her imagination because she nicknamed her her little shadow. So I thought, because she's always around you, maybe that's because it's in your mind. You've created this little creature that's always stuck with you. Or yes, there was another person that was in the mental institution with you that you saw all the time, and that's why she also became your little shadow, because she followed you around all day. But the real reveal ended up being far stranger and much more complicated than anything I had expected, because I was certain I had this down pat, right? I was even telling my sister I'm a genius, I've worked it out, but it was not what I imagined it to be. A couple of incidents start to shatter this world. Firstly, with Mary, who typically runs the household with this cold discipline of a nun. She starts to act a bit more erratically. She starts sleeping past breakfast, snapping at her siblings for minor infractions, and ignoring Natalie entirely. Natalie thinks this shift is tied to maybe a crush that she has on one of the neighbors, these two young bearded men who arrive to help Caleb with a rotting fence on occasion. Natalie experiences also flicker of recognition upon seeing these young men, but couldn't really place why and how she knew them. During a dinner, Mary invites these two men to come along to be near them, and Natalie notices they were disturbingly polite, and this sensation eats her, like something is not quite right. When Natalie finally snaps though and tells the men she's being held against her will and she's kidnapped, or she's, being kept captive here, they just simply ignore her, which is really weird. And they just continue to discuss something like the chicken coop with Caleb, like she's never spoken, and they just they've never heard her. And we have little Maeve. She gets severely sick. So Maeve is her little daughter. He looks about 4 or so, who she has this really maybe dependent relationships she starts getting, and so she's quite attached to little Maeve, and Maeve gets severely sick with fever and laboured breath. Realising that Maeve might die, Natalie goes to find a doctor that Mary says lived nearby and provides her a map to get there. Mary also reveals to her that that time when she told her there was traps all over the wood, she was lying. There was just that one trap, and so it's safe to go out into the woods now. And she gave her directions to the neighbor's house. So Natalie follows this map and she finds little carvings of triangle on these trees, maybe indicating where to go for other people. She finally stumbles upon a cabin, and that cabin is labeled Manosphere. And she sees a truck, which is weird, right? Because we're in 1855. So how can there be a truck? So maybe then her whole theory of her being filmed is coming into reality. And then she goes inside the cabin and she discovers a few things. She sees a framed photo of her own family, her initial family that she remembers from when she was an influencer. And she noticed that the cabin itself is really modern, and there's ramen in there, there's a mini fridge, and there's even a television in that cabin. So again, definitely now it's not 1855. Then sitting in the cabin, she sees one of the neighbors, one of the young men who came to the ranch to assist with fencing, whistling Lamb of God to himself while peeling grocery store stickers of vegetables and dropping them into like a rustic crate. Natalie is shocked, but she manages to say to him, "Help?" He looks up and his eyes are wild, and all he says is, "Mama?" And she whispers, "Doctor?" But he just says, "Mama," again, and gets up. Based on this weird interaction, obviously Natalie is scared and runs out of the cabin and back into the woods. However, she gets lost and she ends up right back at the ranch because she thought maybe after she gets to the doctor, this is her chance also just to run away and find her own life. But she doesn't know how to run away and she just gets back to the ranch. So we're clear. Every reader knows that Natalie is not in 1855. This is not a time travel magical book, but what the hell is happening here? The reveal is going to happen soon because once she's back at the ranch, a red Subaru shows up and a woman who looks very much like Natalie herself in her younger years steps out of the car. From the way the book is structured, it appears to the reader that after Shannon quits, right, Caleb announces he's running for office, Natalie goes to sleep, and suddenly she wakes up in this world of 1855. However, the reality of the timeline is a lot different to the way that the book is structured. After the assault of Shannon, and Shannon resigns, she sues the family and gives a television primetime interview. The interview features behind the scenes footage of the children being forced to film while being miserable and the working illusion of Natalie's homestead life. Senator Douglas Mills is livid, telling Natalie, "You didn't tell me the whole truth, and now little Missy, all of us are forked." He was specifically concerned with how Natalie's alleged predatory behavior towards Shannon would destroy his political reputation. And clearly he is a man that is always just about himself and how it will affect him and not really caring about how anybody else is affected. By this point, Natalie has also lost support from her own family. Her sister Abigail, who was married to that awful sort of high school boyfriend, finally decided to leave him. And instead of showing any sympathy of her sister being trapped in this like abusive marriage, Natalie judges her harshly and says that divorce is a sin, which caused their relationship to fall apart. And then after Shannon's interview airs, Abigail calls Natalie out for her hypocritical life, pointing out that Natalie has been condemning her while facing accusations over intimate and violent incidents with Shannon, because at this point Shannon has also accused Natalie not only of the assault, but also maybe of the SA because of what happened. And Shannon probably is more right of the description of the incident since Natalie blacked out when that was happening. Then, unfortunately, Natalie's relationship with her own mother breaks down around the same time. In the days before Shannon's interview, Eliza calls and admits that Natalie's father did not really leave her because he cheated. Eliza was the one who had the affair, and she had since realized she preferred being on her own than being married to any man. Natalie is horrified by this revelation that her mother is having, especially when she learns that her mother is seeing a therapist and is now attending a more progressive church with Abigail. She accuses Eliza of being brainwashed by this new church and making excuses for infidelity. Eventually, Eliza snaps and asks to her, "Why is it so hard for you to be kind?" Which is a sentence that her mother sort of says to her all the time, like, "Just be kind, Natalie, just be kind," indicating that she's always thought and led Natalie to believe that she's just not a kind person. But maybe it's because Natalie could not, because of the way her brain is made up. So rather than trying to understand what her daughter's like, she just screams at her to be kind. That moment effectively ends their polite and performative relationship, and she no longer has in contact with her mother. So you see that Natalie loses her immediate family, her sister, her mother. Natalie has no real support mechanism left over. Then the public backlash after the interview that Shannon gave gets even worse. Her phone is flooded with abuse from all sides. You've got progressive followers, conservative followers, former fans, and total strangers just giving her abuse and sending her death threats. They call her a cult leader and condemn her as a sinner. Under that pressure, her mental state starts to unravel even worse. So she's already had the blackout moment with Shannon, and now with all this pressure and stress, it's going to go worse and worse. Her thoughts begin to tilt and lurch like a broken amusement park ride, and her paranoia tips into hallucinations. The final stage of her deterioration was marked by a complete breakdown from her own physical reality and chronicle timeline. This is where we go back to Pioneer timeline, because her brain breaks down itself. She doesn't know who she is, and that's why at times now she thinks she's in the Pioneer world. And why does she think that? Especially because her surroundings look like that. Well, we're about to get the answer. So like I said, a vehicle shows up at the ranch. Initially, Natalie thinks that this is the truck that she saw at the Manosphere, and it's the doctor coming, but it's a different vehicle altogether. It doesn't look like the truck. Instead, it's a red Subaru. And the person who gets out that looks like Natalie, it's Clementine. Clementine's appearance is jarring and a confrontation of the reality. She is now a fully grown woman with a modern bob haircut, a tattoo, and high-end winter gear. You find out that in order to escape the external scrutiny and avoid further legal troubles, Natalie and Caleb decide to live the life for real. They believe that if they fully commit to the homestead lifestyle they had curated online, they could prove their authenticity and eventually regain the public's favor yet again. Natalie abruptly deletes all her social media presence, which we know reached 5 million followers. They then ripped out all the hardwood floors, the modern hardwood floors from their current ranch. They sold their car and removed all the modern appliances from the ranch themselves. What Natalie initially pitches as a summer activity to her family and a creative way for them to bond eventually became the permanent situation for her, Caleb, and her children. It is also revealed that the older children, Clementine, Samuel, Stetson, Jessa, and Junebug, left the ranch years ago. At the age of 16, Clementine took her siblings and escaped back into the real world, and they live with Natalie's mother, Eliza, this whole time. While the children that you currently see in Natalie's sort of pioneer life, who are Mary, Abel, Noah, and Maeve, were born during the isolation period. The remaining children were told that their older siblings simply passed away, and they just kept them from questioning the outside world. So they pretty much, Natalie used a tactic that her mother used on her children to say when her husband passed away, that the older children just simply disappeared because they also passed away. Mary was the 6th child. Now, the baby that was nicknamed the little sea creature that Natalie was pregnant with at the time that the disaster broke, and she was born in this pioneer lifestyle, and she became obviously the oldest child in this pioneer life, the young woman who has been forced to act as the mother to her own mother and siblings. As Natalie's mental state started to further deteriorate, rather than Caleb finding help for her or seeking help from the modern world and continuing this pioneer world, instead he just turned to his oldest daughter and said, well, you're going to have to step up now to be the mother because, you know, your mother's health is deteriorating, so you better be the mother and the sibling and pretty much take care of everybody else. Clementine then explains that the neighbors that Natalie saw were her adult sons, Samuel and Stetson. They had been living nearby in the Manosphere cabin and quietly supplying the family with grocery store food, which they dirtied up and stripped off the labels so that the younger children would keep believing in this pioneer fantasy that they're trying to, you know, produce, maybe with convincing from Cabler. Why they would do that, I don't know. Again, like I said, some of the motivations of why things happen, I don't understand. I don't know why they didn't step in. I don't know why Kayla didn't step in when things were just going sort of so dire. This is such a bleak detail, especially because Caleb is still completely useless as farming and providing properly for his family. And even though he's taken on this role of being the man of the house and demanding certain things of his family, abusing his wife and also essaying her because she's not of the right mind, but he still has relationships with her because that's what a man does in this time. Yet you're not doing everything a man is meant to do because you still can't provide. You don't know how to hunt and gather. So therefore, why are you living the portion of the life that is advantage to you and not doing the right thing by everybody else? Natalie's mind, though, is so fractured by this point that she still believes that she is 30-year-old self. And because she's been having relationships with Caleb, she also believes that she's 12 weeks pregnant because she hasn't had her period. And I think this is one of the most troubling and confusing part of the book for me. Earlier, Caleb could barely bring himself to have relations with Natalie and didn't seem to be even that attracted to her. And she had to find other ways to conceive. But yet old Caleb suddenly seems really able to satisfy his wife because Natalie mentions that, now she's having relations with a real man that can get it up for her. And he's willing to force himself on her at times when she's not coherent, which felt like a major shift from the novel. Never fully explained how Caleb's sort of psyche changed from the soft puppy dog, the submissive kind, to now this dominating man that takes what he wants yet still can't provide. And that really didn't sit in reality for me as something that wasn't really fully fleshed out. I understand the possible idea behind it that Caleb can only perform when the world around him casts maybe as a powerful patriarchy rather than a weak, dependable man. Still, the section felt murky to me, and I was not always sure what Burke wanted us to take from it at the end. Natalie, meanwhile, is convinced she is pregnant and desperate to leave the ranch, refuses to have another child under these circumstances. Clementine finally tells her the truth, though, that Natalie, you are 50 years old and you are not pregnant. You are simply experiencing menopause, and that's why you haven't had your period. Clementine produces a legal warrant to take the children away and confronts their decades of abuse on the children, explaining that she could finally act because Senator Doug Mills had run out of money to suppress the long-standing legal investigations that were happening with Natalie and Caleb. So this whole time they've been getting away with it because Caleb's father has been drowning people in lawsuits so that they couldn't do anything about it. So that was the explanation of why Clementine couldn't come and sort of rescue her other siblings. But finally now she can, and she's about to take the children away, and Natalie and Caleb are going to be basically arrested for their child abuse, both physically and psychologically. The physical and psychological abuse that, the current children of abuse is that Mary was forced to be the mother and the sort of adult in the whole situation because, as Caleb had told her, that Natalie was filled with evil spirits now and can no longer do her duties. There is the result of isolation, and you can tell there is no proper care because Mary is described a lot of the times as undernourished with a shallow complexion. She has yellow and crooked teeth, so she has not the base hygiene that you're expecting that parents should provide to their children. And they obviously, because they are not able to provide properly for the children with nutrition, only whatever the sons are providing as in sense of vegetables and sometimes fish, all the kids are smaller than they should be. The new children were raised to believe that they were living in the 19th century and forced into manual labor and hardship and never being able to be educated properly, and none of them could read or write, and being told that the modern world was a nightmare and it's not real. And what they do remember of maybe some modern sort of things that happened to them was just a figment of their imagination and sort of gaslighting to believe that this is where their reality is. Also at this time, obviously, because the kids were kept from, real modern doctors, the children are not vaccinated. Maeve's birth was particularly traumatic. She was born with a blue face, so obviously not breathing. And she wasn't breathing for several minutes because Natalie and Caleb attempted to have a home birth by themselves without a doctor or a midwife to help them. Because of this complication in childbirth, you find out that little Maeve has learning deficiencies and developmental challenges. Even though we think that Maeve is a little girl of maybe 4 or 5, and she speaks like a little 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, you find out that Maeve is actually 10 because she's malnutrition. She never was able to develop, and her brain was never able to develop, and so she speaks like a little toddler most of the time. So as Clementine is taking the children away, Natalie begs Clementine to take her with them. She wants to go with them. And Clementine refuses and turns around and says, "You're the one who built this place, Mum. You don't need anyone's help to leave it," because she's always had the power to leave it if she wants, because she's the adult. She's the one that forced them into it. Then suddenly Natalie just fixes this game face show smile on her and waves the children goodbye as they're taken away by Clementine in her car. Now, left all alone on the ranch, Natalie and Caleb admit that they hate each other and they should have just divorced decades ago. Rightly so. I think you should have left that marriage ages ago. Probably after the first child, when Natalie realized that Caleb is not the man she wanted to be. She was suffering from, postpartum depression. She needed help. She didn't need more children, and she certainly didn't need to move into a ranch. They finally decide to leave the ranch together on foot, walking from the cardboard cutout of the life that they created. The book concludes 5 years after the rescue. The children have a new life, which is great. So all the siblings, Clementine, Samuel, and all that, they now live together in an apartment in Santa Monica in California. Natalie is serving a 30-year prison sentence for 4 counts of aggravated child abuse and other charges. She is interviewed by her former college roommate, Renna, so remember her. She obviously becomes a journalist. And during the interview, Renna gives her a copy of a book. The book is The Book of Mary, and it's written by her little sea creature, Mary. The book is dedicated to Natalie. Mary in the book admits that despite everything that happened at the ranch, she still misses her mother, specifically citing her temper, her jokes, and her strange little moods. She knows that she misses the rare moments when a true smile would light up Natalie's face. Mary expresses her sorrow that her mother got so lost in yesteryear, while acknowledging the public debate over who is to blame for the family trauma. Mary states, "I don't think that matters as much as some people say it does," noting simply that she knew life was hard for Natalie either way. Mary writes that what the saddest part is that her mother missed out on the beauty of the modern world. Through the process of leaving the ranch, Mary explains she learned that you cannot change people who refuse to be changed. You can only love them. She presents her book as all the love I have to give pressed into pages. She concludes by hoping that her mother will read the book to the end, explaining that the place where your life ends is exactly where mine begins, referencing the moment she first saw the real world and wanted to be part of it. And that, my friends, is the whole wild story of Yesteryear. I thought it was a really well-told novel, especially when it came to Natalie's development and the layers that Burke gives her. Where the book lost me a little was with some of the side characters, like I said earlier, particularly Caleb and Shannon. As I mentioned, Caleb's shift from his soft puppy dog man into the cold, hard version of Caleb never fully clicked for me, and I never saw the evidence because I really didn't get into it. His sudden predatory behavior felt like a major change that didn't get explained, but the novel did give me enough to understand why it might have happened or what point Burke was trying to make with it. I also kept wondering why Caleb never stopped the pioneer experience. He was there for decades himself. Could he not see that the children were malnourished and clearly in need of maybe doctors and real care? That part felt especially hard to understand, particularly because the situation seems, like I said earlier, loosely based on another influencer case, and I would say this reminded me a lot about Ruby Frank's case, where she's serving a 30-year prison sentence for severely abusing and starving her children. But in that real case, the father, Kevin, had been separated from the family and reportedly had no contact with the children for a whole year. Well, it was only a year. Whereas Caleb's situation is different. He's present the whole entire time. He's actively going along with the fantasy, and yet the novel never really tells us what happens to him in the end. Is he also serving prison time? Because he deserves to. Natalie has clearly lost her grip on reality and not mentally stable. But Caleb still seems aware enough to participate. He controls the household. He keeps the children trapped in the lie. So why does he allow it to continue, especially when he's meant to be the parent who actually enjoys children, because he's the one that wanted to be the kindergarten teacher and he gets along well with children. He always wanted them. So why would you not help them when they are suffering? Shannon's choice also felt under-explained. She had an affair with Caleb even though she never seems to like him that much. When Natalie asks if Shannon is pregnant with Caleb's baby, Shannon says she would never be stupid enough to have his child, even though she also insists he's kinder and smarter than Natalie gives him credit for. So why go there in the first place? If you think that I would never get pregnant by this man, she's almost looking down on Natalie for staying with a man like Caleb, then why would you do all this? Did you sleep with him for revenge, but then you say he's nice because you pity him? Or did you just hate Natalie? I don't really understand. I wish the book had dug into that a little bit more, but if you have theories, please let me know in the comments below, because I couldn't really quite work out why Shannon acted the way she did with Caleb and the sort of later time that she had on the farm. But as always, thank you so much for listening to my recap and final rant today. As always, if you enjoy this recap and review, please don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started. We've got plenty more books and TV shows and movies to review and completely unhinged recaps coming your way. So until next time, have a good one. I will see you soon.